We begin at the edge of a quiet Minnesota lake, on a footpath that monks have walked for more than a century and a half. This is the chapel walk at St. John's Abbey, an out-and-back trail of about 3 miles that hugs the shore of Lake Sagatagan on its way to a small stone chapel in the woods. The ground here belongs to a Benedictine monastery, one of the largest in the Western Hemisphere, and to the university that grew up beside it. Every tree, every rise of glacial hill, and every distant bell is part of a single working community of prayer, teaching, and land. Come walk it with me. We are in Collegeville Township, in Stewards County, in the rolling heart of central Minnesota, a short drive west of St. Cloud. The trail sits inside the St. John's Abbey Arboretum, 2,500 acres of lakes, prairie, and hardwood forest owned by the Abbey and the university. This is not a public park in the usual sense, but the home ground of a religious order that has cared for it since the 1850s. The chapel walk threads through the middle of that land, from the campus beachfront out to the Peninsula Chapel and back. Keep that map in mind as the woods close in around us. The path leaves the beach and slips into a canopy of oak, pine, maple, birch, and tamarack. Underfoot, the trail is soft and rolling, never technical, the kind of ground made for thinking rather than scrambling. Stone bridges cross the low, wet places, and small statues appear now and then among the trees, reminders that this is hallowed as well as wild ground. Sunlight comes down in scattered shafts through a high leafy ceiling. It is worth slowing here, because the story of this place begins long before the trail was ever marked. In 1856, 5 Benedictine monks arrived in the young state of Minnesota, sent west from St. Vincent Archabbey in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. They came to serve German-speaking Catholic settlers on the frontier and to plant a monastery that would follow the ancient rule of Saint Benedict. That small band became St. John's Abbey, a house of the American Cassinese congregation of the Order of Saint Benedict. From those 5 men grew a community that today numbers around 110 professed monks. The land we are walking is the fruit of that arrival. The Benedictine motto is often given in Latin as prayer and work, and both are written across these acres. The monks farmed and logged this ground, built with its stone and timber, and gathered many times a day to sing the hours in choir. That rhythm of labor and worship shaped not only the buildings but the forest itself. A monastery thinks in centuries, and so the trees, the water, and the trails were all planted for people not yet born. As we climb this gentle ridge, we are moving through land that has been tended as a spiritual discipline. The school the monks opened beside their monastery grew into St. John's University, chartered in 1883. Today, students share these woods with the community that founded them, walking the same chapel walk between classes and prayer. The Abbey and the university are distinct but deeply bound together, monks and scholars living side by side on one campus in the trees. That partnership is why a hiking trail here passes chapels, sculpture, and one of the most famous modern churches in America. Learning and monastic life are simply 2 halves of the same place. Notice how the ground never lies flat for long, how it rolls in low hills and shallow bowls. That shape is the signature of the ice that once covered this country. The whole arboretum sits on a glacial moraine, a rumpled blanket of earth and stone left behind when the last great ice sheets melted away. The lakes in these hollows, Sagatagan among them, are water caught in the ice sheet's footprints. To read this terrain is to read the end of the Ice Age. Thousands of years ago, glaciers thousands of feet thick ground south across Minnesota, carrying rock and soil frozen inside them. When the climate warmed, the ice stalled and melted in place, dropping its cargo in long ridges and scattered mounds called moraines. Blocks of buried ice left behind deep pits that filled with meltwater and became the region's countless lakes. That is the origin of the rolling, pond-dotted country we are hiking through. The Abbey did not choose flat farmland, but a wild glacial landscape, and it has kept much of it wild on purpose. In 1997, the monks formally set aside their land as a natural arboretum, a place devoted to conservation, education, research, and spiritual renewal. It was a modern name for a very old Benedictine idea that caring for creation is part of caring for God. The Arboretum holds forest, wetland, savanna, and prairie, a patchwork of habitats managed with real ecological care. Trails like this one exist so that walkers can meet that land directly and quietly. As the trees thin ahead, we reach one of the rarest patches of all. Between the dense forest and the open grassland lies the oak savanna, scattered broad oaks standing over sunlit grass. It is one of the most endangered habitats in North America, nearly erased by farming and fire suppression, and the Arboretum protects about 35 acres of it. These savannas depend on fire, and the stewards here use controlled burns to keep the young brush from swallowing the grass. Great bur oaks, their bark thick enough to survive the flames, spread their crowns above the open ground. Standing among them, you feel the landscape breathe out into light. Where the trees fall away entirely, the land opens into prairie, a sea of tall native grasses and wildflowers. In late summer, when this footage was filmed, the grasses stand shoulder high and the air hums with insects. This is not accidental wilderness but restored prairie, carefully rebuilt on ground that had been cleared long ago. Every stem here is part of a deliberate act of repair. It is a quiet reminder that healing land is slow, patient work, the kind a monastery is built to do. Before settlement, prairie and savanna covered much of this part of Minnesota, but the plow left only fragments behind. The Arboretum keeps about 50 acres of prairie and works to restore native grass and flowers across a much larger tract of its ground. Deep-rooted big bluestem, coneflower, and dozens of other species are seeded, burned, and tended until the old plant community returns. These roots reach many feet down, storing carbon and holding the soil against drought. In rebuilding the prairie, the monks are stitching a small piece of the lost Minnesota back into place. The path curves again toward the lake, and through the trunks the water flashes silver. Lake Sagatagan is the blue heart of the Arboretum, a broad glacial lake that the whole chapel walk is built around. Loons and herons work its shallows, and its far shore is a low green wall of unbroken forest. The trail follows the water closely now, rising just above it on the bank. Ahead, on a wooded point reaching into the lake, waits the destination the monks named for the sea. Lake Sagatagan fills one of the deep basins that the melting ice left behind, ringed almost entirely by monastery land. Because the Abbey owns its shoreline, the lake has been spared the docks and cabins that crowd so much of lake country. Its water is clear and quiet, mirroring the pines in the changing sky. Monks have rowed, prayed, and swum here for generations, and in winter they have skated across its ice. For the pilgrim on foot, it is a wide, calm presence that the entire walk leans against. Near the beach, the trail passes beneath a beautiful timber-framed gateway, all heavy pegged beams and clean joinery. It marks the threshold of the chapel walk, a made thing set deliberately at the start of a sacred route. There is a craft and a care to it that tells you this path is meant to be entered with intention. Structures like this turn a simple lakeside hike into something closer to a procession. It was raised, as it happens, from wood grown on these very grounds. The chapel trailhead was built in the summer of 2015, framed in the old way from local white pine. Monks and volunteers cut timber from the Abbey Arboretum and carried it north to the North House Folk School to learn the timber framing craft. Then they brought the shaped beams home and raised the frame by hand beside Lake Sagatagan. It is a small building that carries a large idea that the land, the labor, and the prayer all come from the same place. Passing under it, we step onto the final approach to the chapel. Now the trail follows a slender neck of land out into the lake, water glinting on both sides. The forest here is old and close, oak and pine leaning over a path softened by fallen needles. Somewhere ahead, glimpsed and then hidden again, a pale steeple rises among the trunks. Stone bridges carry us over the last low, wet ground of the walk. Each step feels like an arrival long delayed, and the chapel that waits has a story of loss and return. The little sanctuary at the trail's end is the Stella Chapel, first built in 1872. Its Latin name means Star of the Sea, an ancient title for Mary honored as a guide to travelers and sailors. The monks raised it as a place of pilgrimage across the water, a quiet goal reached by boat or on foot around the shore. When it was first built, it stood on an island, though shifting water levels have since joined that ground to the mainland as a peninsula. For a century and a half, it has been the still point at the far end of this walk. The path here is dressed with small human touches, a stone bridge, a mossy statue, a bench set to face the water. These are the marks of a route walked as devotion, not merely for exercise. Generations of monks, students, and visitors have followed exactly this line to the chapel and back. In the quiet, you can sense how many feet have smoothed these stones. But the chapel we are approaching is not the first to stand on this spot. In 1903, fire destroyed the original Stella Maris chapel, leaving only its foundations on the point. The loss might have ended the pilgrimage, but the community chose instead to build again. In 1915, the monks raised a new chapel on the same sacred ground, and it is that structure the trail leads to today. Rebuilding on the ashes of the old is a deeply Benedictine act, a refusal to let a place of prayer simply vanish. The chapel now standing is both very old in spirit and, in its stones, just over a century in age. The trees part, and there it is at last, a modest white and stone chapel on its point above Lake Sagatagan. After the long green tunnel of the woods, the sudden openness around it feels like a held breath released. Water surrounds the peninsula on three sides, and the only sounds are wind, birds, and the lap of the lake. Pilgrims pause here, sit on the steps, and simply look. This is the turning place of the walk, the far end of the out and back. The chapel is small and plain inside, a single quiet room built for stillness rather than grandeur. Light falls through simple windows onto worn wood and cool stone, and an image of Mary keeps watch over the space. There is room for only a handful of pilgrims at a time, which is part of its gift. People leave written prayers here, light candles, and sit in a silence that the surrounding water deepens. In an age of noise, a walk that ends in a room like this is its own kind of medicine. We turn now and start the long walk back through the woods toward the campus. On the return, the same trail feels different. The light shifted, the lake seen from new angles. There is time to think about how much this quiet ground is bound to the larger monastery just over the hill. For beyond these trees stands a building that changed the course of modern religious architecture. To understand this place fully, we have to look toward the Abbey church. The name Stella Maris, Star of the Sea, carries the whole meaning of this walk. For centuries, sailors prayed to Mary under that title, trusting her to guide them safely home across dark water. Here, far inland, the monks kept the image alive on the shore of a Minnesota lake. A pilgrim crossing to the chapel becomes, in a small way, a traveler steering by that star. It is a fitting patron for a trail that is really about finding your way to quiet. The path rises away from the water and back toward the beating heart of St. John's. Through the trees, you begin to sense the presence of the great buildings of the monastery and university. By the middle of the 20th century, this thriving community had far outgrown its old church. The monks decided to build something wholly new, and their choice of architect would astonish the wider world. What they raised still stands as one of the boldest churches in America. In 1954, the community chose Marcel Breuer, a Hungarian-born master of the Bauhaus, to design their new church. Built between 1958 and 1961, it is a vast sculpture in raw concrete, its walls folded like a great pleated tent. Inside, huge concrete piers branch upward like trees to hold the roof, a forest turned to stone above the worshippers. It is one of the founding works of modern church architecture in the United States. The Abbey had reached across the ocean, and brought the future home to the Minnesota woods. Breuer worked in the language later called brutalism, honest concrete left rough and unadorned. Rather than gild the church, he let the material itself carry the weight of the sacred. The bold monastery that dared to build it has since inspired filmmakers and architects far beyond Collegeville. Standing near it, you understand that this community has never been afraid of its own age. The same monks who restore ancient Prairie also commissioned a radically modern house of prayer. The most startling feature stands in front of the church, a towering slab of concrete called the Bell Banner. It rises about 112 feet into the sky, a great flat wall pierced with an opening and topped by a cross, and it houses 5 bells. To enter the church, you pass beneath it, crossing from the ordinary world into sacred ground under its shadow. It works as both a bell tower and a gateway, a threshold cast in concrete. Nothing else on the Minnesota horizon looks remotely like it. Back among the trees, the light through the leaves feels gentle after imagining all that concrete. Yet the church and the forest belong to the same imagination, the same long Benedictine patience. One shapes living wood and grass over centuries, the other shapes stone and glass for the ages. Inside the Abbey church, that love of light takes an astonishing form. It hangs across the north wall in a wall of colored glass unlike any other. The north face of the Abbey church holds an immense wall of stained glass, said to be among the largest anywhere. It is built from 430 hexagonal panes, a honeycomb of abstract color rather than pictures of saints. Through it, light pours into the concrete interior in a slow-shifting mosaic that changes with the hours and seasons. Breuer and his collaborators wanted worshippers to feel color as pure light rather than as story. It turns the whole hard, gray church into a vessel for the sun. The monks of St. John's also gave the world one of the great books of our time. In 1998, the Abbey and University commissioned the calligrapher Donald Jackson to create the St. John's Bible, entirely by hand. Written on calfskin vellum with hand-cut quills and illuminated with gold and ground minerals, it was completed in 2011. Filling 7 great volumes with more than 160 illuminations, it is the first handwritten, illuminated Bible commissioned by a Benedictine monastery since the invention of printing. From 5 monks on the frontier to a masterpiece of modern art, this community keeps making beautiful things. We come back at last to the beach where we started, the chapel behind us and the lake bright ahead. In 3 miles, this trail carries you through Ice Age hills, restored Prairie, a rebuilt lakeside chapel, and the shadow of one of the boldest churches in America. It is a walk about patience, about tending land and faith across the slow turning of centuries. Whether you come as a pilgrim or simply as a hiker, St. John's gives the same quiet gift, a path that leads you gently back to stillness. Thank you for watching. Follow for more of the trails of the world.